Mini Plein Air Painting by Remington Robinson. So in this book, he shows you how to set up your tin and goes over all the materials that you need. For example, he shows you how to prepare wood panels, how to set up your tin with Velcro, and he has a pencil case filled with paintbrushes. He uses oils, but you can also use open acrylics, which dry slower. In this section about techniques, he has some good tips. For example, how to paint a fine line over existing colors. Another tip is the in-brush gradient, where you have two pools of color, and you create the gradient, and then you can just apply it in one stroke to create a sky or other effects. And then he gets into all the different painting tutorials. He begins with the monochrome painting where you just use one color plus white. There's a demo on painting with primary colors where you only need 3 colors plus white. He paints different tourist destinations such as Niagara Falls, Radio City Music Hall, and other spots around the country. Mini plein air painting is fun and addictive. Pick it up and give it a try. You can do it anywhere and it doesn't take very much time. Here's a few of my paintings. Painting Into the Light by Jenny Aitken. She starts off by talking about the gear that she uses, and she emphasizes keeping things simple. You don't need a lot of colors, and you don't need a lot of gear either. She talks about the 3 C's: composition, color, and contrast. So here are some do's and don'ts for composition. She makes some good points about color, and in this example, she shows that the color of a lemon is actually different than what you think it is. Like, you think it might be this bright yellow, but in actuality it might be more dull like this. I really like this section on contrast, and she gives examples. You can contrast thick and thin paint, details versus softness, or something like gray versus saturated colors. There are a number of projects in here. There's the sparkling ocean. Another project is of a woodland. Here's a project about painting sparkles on water. She also does still life demos and paintings of people too. This is a good book if you're trying to create the illusion of light and atmosphere in your paintings, especially if you enjoy painting coastal scenes and boats. Oils, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner by Norman Long. He covers all the tools and materials that he uses. In this section on drawing, he emphasizes drawing with the paint instead of with a pencil. I like this section on painting techniques. I've never seen this in a book before where someone breaks down all the different mark making techniques you can make with oil paints. So for example, you have impasto wet into wet, and then this is the lift off technique where when you lift the paintbrush up, it creates this little peak. There's also scumbling. There's a whole bunch of techniques in here that you can use. And then he goes into a bunch of demos, and the first one is a white teacup on a white background. You can paint a kitchen still life, and you'll notice he puts the colors down here that you'll need for each assignment. In this project where you paint a sky, you develop the texture first, let it dry, and then you can paint over it. So here's the texture in the various stages. There's also a section on painting people, which includes doing a self-portrait. I think the benefit of this book is that it's concise, and it includes all the essential information that you need to know as a beginner. If you're looking to loosen up with your watercolors and to use less literal colors, this is a good book to get started with. In this exercise, you put down yellow, red, and then blue, and you see all the different ways that the colors mingle together. The whole point of this exercise is that you can get some interesting colors and effects if you blend the colors on the paper. So he talks a lot about color, and there's a section in here about using colors for the different seasons. So there's spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So here's a bunch of different techniques. Talks a lot about masking fluid and the different ways you can apply it. You can spatter it and stuff like that. Most people want to avoid backruns, but you can use it creatively in a painting. And in this painting, you can see there's backruns right here and in the trees and stuff. It creates interesting textures. He says sketchbooks are really important to him. He likes sketching outside and capturing the mood of the scene while he's there. The rest of this book is mostly his in-depth demos, and I find that he does take a lot of photographs and explains what he's doing. Oil Painting Secrets from a Master by Linda Couture. She was a student of David Leffel. This book is broken down into different sections. Part 1 is artistic thinking. There's a discussion here about concept, that before you begin, you should have a concept for your painting. Part 2 covers the painting process, and there's a lot of practical tips in here. I've always noticed this too, is that the paint from the tube is usually too stiff, so it helps to add some medium to it. He has his arrangement of colors and suggestions for brushes. He talks a lot about finding the essence of a shape and not painting every single detail. You can do that by massing in the major shapes. Doesn't matter what the subject is, you can mass in features on a portrait like this. He covers different genres such as painting still lifes, and of course there's a section on portraits. So one way to approach painting a face is to see it in terms of planes and colors. So the front of the forehead could be one plane and the side is another plane. This is a good book if you're an oil painter. There's lots of good tips about portrait painting, still lifes, and more. Sketching Outdoors by Barry Herneman. This book is about experiencing the outdoors through sketching. So he has a good section on all the different gear that he uses for sketching outside. He compares the differences in the mediums. So there's like an ink drawing, and then you can add some light washes to it. And here's a line and wash watercolor where you draw with the ink, and then you can apply washes of watercolor over the top of it. There's also watercolor pencils, which create a unique effect. Here's a good demo where he demonstrates how the different textures of paper affect the painting. So here's a close-up of rough watercolor paper, and then this is hot press. He has ideas for where you can paint nearby. You could waste a lot of time like looking for something picturesque, but there's probably something right in front of you that you could sketch. There's coastal scenes, towns and cities, and hills and mountains. And then there are ideas for when you travel. And if the weather fails, you can always sketch indoors. And then the back of the book has 5 different demos. This is a really good book if you like sketching outdoors. You'll definitely find something useful in here. Landscapes in Acrylics by Barry Herneman. If you're not confident in your drawing abilities, you can use these overlays to trace the drawings onto your paper. He talks about how he built up experience with watercolor painting, but then he realized he could use acrylics like watercolors. He likes to prepare his paint by thinning it out with water first on his palette. There's numerous demonstrations throughout the book. For example, how to apply washes such as a graded wash or a flat wash. And you can use a spray bottle to keep your paints wet while you're working. There's a bunch of demos in here. Most of them are on paper. This is a simple landscape. Here's one of distant hills. Here's the different surfaces you can use. You got watercolor paper, board, or a canvas. He uses all 3. The neat thing about painting with acrylics like watercolor is you get nice effects like this. So there's a ton of demos in here to keep you busy. The publisher provided this book, but it has no impact upon my review. David Bellamy's Complete Guide to Landscapes. This is a very comprehensive book on painting landscapes in watercolors. The book is basically broken down into how to paint different types of subject matter, but there's plenty of information about the paints and materials that he uses, such as the different brushes and sketchbooks, how to handle fluid washes, working wet into wet. So here's a whole section on how to paint skies. And he mentions that you want to consider the types of clouds that you include in your paintings, just for variety. This book also includes plenty of full-length demonstrations where he goes step by step. There's also a section in the back about different sketching methods. I always prefer the pen and wash sketching technique, where you draw with ink and then you apply washes of watercolor. If you're interested in painting landscapes in watercolor, I definitely recommend picking this book up. The publisher provided this book, but it has no impact upon my review. Atmospheric Buildings in Watercolor. At the beginning of the book, he covers the different materials that he uses, including the paper and the paints. He has a section on selecting different papers and whether or not you should stretch it or not. Some basic instruction on how to hold a brush and how to take care of your brushes. Then he gets into the watercolor techniques. There's the basic wet on dry flat wash, graduated washes, dry brushing technique, lifting color off the paper, painting wet into wet, wet over dry, and taking advantage of granulation to create textures. I like this section on direct and indirect painting, which is something I think about quite a bit, where direct painting is kind of like where you apply it in one layer and you're done. Indirect painting is building up a painting in layers. You can also do a combination, and he has examples of each of those on this page. This is a good book if you're interested in painting architecture in watercolor. I recommend that you pick it up. The publisher provided this book, but it has no impact upon my review. Up next, you can watch my book review playlist. Thanks for watching.